Blew my mind. I've been telling everybody about the importance of the sun and the cycles and the rhythms.
And the principles with physiomental health are based on these guideposts.
People that are probably watching this video were struggling with their sleep, not able to get to sleep, or were sleeping in too long, waking up throughout the night.
She was a hardworking woman that had 2 jobs. I just can't wait till I get home so I can knock out and get some rest. And there's a lot of stories I can tell you.
They were talking about sleep.
Yes, sir. How you doing, Justin?
I'm good. That last podcast about the circadian rhythm just blew my mind. I've been telling everybody about the importance of the sun and the cycles and the rhythms. And yeah, that idea of biosynchronicity is so powerful.
Well, looking forward to this discussion. Today, hello, this is Joey Ancheta. I'm from Physiomental Health Research Center. And today we're going to talk about one of our guidepost guidelines in the physiomental health model, which is sleep health. The guiding principles with Physiomental Health Research Center is based on what we consider the guideposts, which are avenues that we help assist our health seekers in searching their true well-being. And the principles with physiomental health are based on these guideposts, which include mental health, holistic health, sleep health, nutrient health, and exercise health. These guideposts help us as health guides, help our health seekers seek the ultimate goal of true well-being. And today's discussion will be with sleep health, which is falls right into our last discussion with circadian rhythm and understanding how biosynchronicity ties into all of these core principles. And it's very critical in our understanding of what has been problematic in our modern society and how we could implement these almost forgotten new research studies that have brought more insight in how we could gain that true goal. So I'd really like to dive into sleep health by first asking about more on the lines of experiences of you and others that you've talked to, Justin, that seems to be a problem these days.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of us know people that are probably watching this video are struggling with their sleep. You know, we're either not able to get to sleep or we're sleeping in too long. We're waking up throughout the night, and we can feel that how that affects our body, the clarity in our thoughts, our fatigue, our brain fog. And I really want to hear from you the science behind why this happens and what we can do to prevent it or resolve the problem.
Yeah, and it's obviously a very common problem. As an ER physician for the past 30 years, that was oftentimes one of the major complaints or additional complaints to what they came in for in regards to their sleep and how well they slept. And I recall a time when I was taking care of a family of 4, a mother and her 3 children. They were triplets, and she was a hardworking woman that had 2 jobs. And I remember when I was examining her children, she would tell me, "Boy, Dr. Chetta, I'm so exhausted. I'm so tired from all this physical work that I've been doing. And I just can't wait till I get home so I can knock out and get some rest because I really need to sleep." And I told her, it's like, well, you know what? Your physical body is actually resting right now. You driving in the car, you sitting in front of me, your body is resting. And if you ate breakfast this morning, you're replacing the caloric losses that you had during that time when you're working real hard physically. So your body right now is getting all it needs to recover from all the work that it's done. Mm-hmm. The reason why you need sleep right now isn't to rest your body as much as it is to rest your mind. And I think that's lost on a lot of people sometimes as far as the reasons why we sleep. And what's astounding to me is how every animal on the planet needs sleep as well. And what the advantages and for that is, why do we invest so much time in our bodies? Why does our body crave this need for sleep? It is oftentimes a very almost philosophical question to ask and ponder sometimes. And I'm curious from your experience as from the holistic realm, as far as how sleep has been utilized in your practice, as far as a gateway into understanding how people consider sleep.
For me, it's a sign. It's like almost when I'm not sleeping properly, I know that something is wrong. Something's
Yeah.
wrong with my diet, something's wrong with my mental health. I'm not exercising enough. And I actually, just listening to you talk, I'm realizing I don't know a lot about the science of sleep, and I'm really excited to learn more. And what's interesting when you said that when we're not moving, our body is actually resting and doing some healing work. And that, I find when I'm really imbalanced throughout the day, I work really hard, I move really hard, but I also take lots of little 15-minute, half-hour sessions of sitting or relaxing or meditating. And I didn't realize that my body was actually doing some healing during
Right.
those times
Right.
too. So yeah, I'm
Yeah.
really curious what actually happens when we sleep, and
Yeah.
why is it important that we don't wake up throughout the night? Because I know when I wake up throughout the night, I wake up feeling shitty, and when I sleep through the whole night, I feel
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, and that's absolutely, thanks for sharing that. It also compels me to even ponder the additional question regarding sleep, which is, why do all animals sleep? And also, why do we invest so much time with it? If you consider the part about, and I'm talking very basic here, as far as the animalistic urges and requirements, each and every animal on the planet needs to do basically three functions. They have to be able to eat and consume food. They also need to reproduce in some method or fashion. And then they also have to be able to avoid predators and other ways that may harm themselves. Okay, that's very generally speaking, but considering those facts and understanding that each time that we evolve or become more what's called an advanced animal in the animal kingdom, we're talking about microbes all the way up to humans, if you can kind of gauge that hierarchy. Each time that increment of advancement occurs in evolution, more sleep is a lot allocated for that purpose.
Oh, no way.
So when you can kind of consider that from an evolutionary standpoint, why would you accommodate so much effort and time for sleep when it doesn't do any of those three things? It doesn't allow you to afford time to find a mate and procreate. It makes you vulnerable to being hunted and being vulnerable to being attacked when you're sleeping, and you're not actively looking for food for consumption. So almost in some studies, depending on the animal, anywhere between 40 to 60% of your time of your living is utilized for sleep. So again, the question to ponder is, why do we invest as an advanced animal species so much time for sleep? And what is the advantage, evolutionary advantage for that sleep? It's not for rest, which is again more of the question from a scientist side. So what is the advantage? And that's the fundamental point I'm making here, is that it is for the mind. It is for recovery of that mind in ways that we're slowly discovering, and why there's so much research being dedicated now for sleep studies and understanding what happens when you don't get enough, and the consequences of our modern society as we start dwindling less and less time for sleep, when again our evolutionary being and our advancement of our species depends on that amount of sleep. So very briefly, when we talk about sleep, it's broken down to general speaking, non-REM and REM sleep. We also talk about sleep levels or stages of sleep. 1 through 5, there's different brainwave activity that we can monitor and see. And very generally speaking now, the first stages of sleep are very light sleep. It's very easy to transition from conscious to subconscious during that period of time. That's the almost sleepy wakefulness that we have.
What's
that's
what's the brain wave? What are the wave levels? So like what state are you in now? I don't have this memorized.
It's very again, it's very in depth, but there's different waves, alpha, delta, gamma type of wave that's monitored that can determine your level of depth. The great analogy that I like to give for sleep and the depth of sleep and the stages is a submarine. So consider a submarine that's basically on the surface. Okay, it's floating on the surface. It sees everything. It doesn't need to use a periscope because it can look 360 around. It can see the world around it. So that's consciousness. Okay, when it submerges, okay, it's right beneath that surface level. So it's not seen. So you're slowly drifting in that time, but still very easily you can pop up and get into that conscious level, right? So that's
What's
stage
the
one.
conscious wave? What's the conscious brainwave state? Like, what are we in right now?
The conscious, well, it's just basically alertness. It's basically
Oh no, I mean, is it alpha, beta, gamma?
oh, well,
Which?
there's the waves that I'm talking about are more with the rhythmic cadence of the brain, that kind of like the background information. But when we're alert, everything's going on. If you monitor the brainwave
all the
activity,
different.
yeah,
Okay,
because our cortex is firing off. We're obviously engaging right now. We're hearing things. I'm hearing background noises. I'm talking to you, but I'm able to elicit factual information from my past history. So there's a lot of activity going on. So everything's
alpha,
firing.
beta, gamma, delta. It's all happening right now.
Yeah, it's
Got
all
it.
happening.
Okay. And when we take that,
but when you're removing consciousness, removing the sensory inputs, then we're just going down to the background base wave activities that we can monitor these different stages of sleep. So again, going back to that submarine analogy, when you're slowly drifting into these different levels, and again, there's a lot of different pathological illnesses, that mental health issues as well, that occur during these different stages. But just to be more general speaking, there basically are 5 stages that drift all the way down. And of course, the deeper you go, as the analogy says, it's very deep sleep. It's hard to arouse when you're really deep in the ocean or close to the ocean floor. So you can think of stage 5 is right at that ocean floor, very deep sleep, very hard to arouse. But what occurs during that period of time is a periscope shoots up, and that periscope from that very deep stages shoots up, and now you're able to kind of look around, but you're still very deep in that sleep pattern. Okay, what is that? That's REM. Now, for lack of a better term for that point of sleep, we call it REM, or REM, rapid eye movement. And that just shows that when there's patients are sleeping, when they monitor sleep studies, the eyes were moving erratic while the eyelids were closed, and they call that rapid eye movement. The thought was at that point is that's when dreams are occurring, but it's more than just that. So the way consciously I think about it is that non-REM sleep, which is the stage 1 through stage 5, allows that mind to basically start allocating where these memories should be placed. It's very interesting in sleep studies when they talk about what non-REM is doing and fulfilling as a need for us from a medical standpoint. It's basically arranging furniture. It's arranging data, filing concepts down to where it needs to be regulated. Does this need to be in deep storage, or is this something that's relevant that I need to keep in more?
You said this is during the non-REM. This is the one
during the non-REM
or whatever. Okay.
And that's just basically removing clutter. Basically, is the way I think about it. What's fascinating?
We haven't even talked about healing. I mean, so many of us think that what happens when we sleep is our body is healing itself, and it's just this very kind of simple, which I'm realizing is naive. I've never even thought about what the brain's actually doing.
And what's interesting is what REM does, and I think of so just the normal stages. So stage 1 through stage 5, right? And then up periscope, you have the REM, looks around, and the conscious mind. We'll talk about why that's important in just a moment.
Oh, that's like the dream. The periscope is like the dreaming eye.
Yeah. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then pop up periscope, REM sleep, and then it repeats itself. Now it doesn't go. The stages don't go all the way up back to stage 1. Usually it drifts around 2, 3 or so, and then it cycles down from 3, 4, 5, REM sleep again, which is only about 15 minutes on average. It's not very long.
Really?
And we'll talk about that in a second. And then again, the cycle repeats. So in normal, healthy sleep, you should cycle through this deep sleep and then REM, a pattern of about 3 or 4 times normally. That's what's maybe considered healthy sleep. Okay. Wow. Now consider a couple pathological problems that occur. Have you heard of sleepwalkers? Or okay. We'll talk about that. And there's another term that we use called night terrors that oftentimes is confused with nightmares. Nightmares and dreams occur during REM sleep because that's when our conscious mind is alert. It's actively trying to understand or process. And, we could talk about Sigmund Freud and Jung and all these others that analyze dreams and understand why we are dreaming. That's another discussion to discuss. But suffice to say, it occurs during REM sleep. Now, during REM sleep, if you awaken someone during that period of time and ask them, hey, I heard you talk in your sleep, what were you dreaming? They can immediately recall that and tell you what that event was about. Okay. That again is because because your conscious mind is alert and awake, even though your body and your mind in concept is asleep, but your conscious portion of your mind is alert and able to recall a dream that is having during that period of time, if they're awakened
Which
during
is
that
why
period
you
of
can
time.
remember it. If you right when you open your eyes, you can remember
Yes.
everything.
Yeah. And I always put it like a notepad, and a lot of scientists do that. Put something on there. And there's great talks about Mendeleev, who discovered a periodic table, and his discoveries came in that enlightenment period where it's an aha moment that they have to write down. It's immediately after a dream. Very fascinating stuff. And I always tell people that REM is when genius happens. It's really what. And the other fascinating point about what REM does. I told you that non-REM allows for the allocation of data to be placed in different regions of the brain. So it's kind of like the highway distribution center. You could think of Amazon as a good.
I'm thinking of a computer hard drive, and you're
Yeah.
compartmentalizing and packing and foldering and
Yeah, but the beauty of REM and the importance of it is that now this is the part that takes that conscious sleep. Okay, we're talking about unconscious events before, and with non-REM, now we're talking about conscious events. This is the point where something that I learned today, I can now link with some memory I had during third grade or some event, and I can make that connection and understanding, or take the leap forward in saying, if I learned something today that I learned from ninth grade experiment, hey, can I join those two and make another concept beyond that? So again, it's a way of putting things together, and that's what REM sleep allows us to do. Is that aha moment is because of that ability of the conscious mind to make links, make connections. Exactly. And that again is the fascinating thing. Why also I believe is the technological advancement of our species is because of REM and our higher cortex, of course, and our ability to make these connections. But in order to make inventions or ideas or philosophical thought is based on this ability of our brain to make these connections, where it isn't as straightforward as A to B. We can make the A to C connection from that. Yeah. And that's really what
I want to start talking about psychedelics and what's happening too, but not in this moment. But
I'm sorry to finish that point of when things go wrong. Okay, so that's the normal process, right?
Well, real quick, the REM sleep. What you're basically saying, the during that, so non-REM, compartmentalizing, packaging, putting into folders. It's the librarian putting things away, and then during REM, we're actually either altering or changing or strengthening beliefs and concepts. Wow.
Yeah. So to me, the word is it looks at possibilities, and that's the intriguing part of all this. Non-REM is more of the concrete line of thinking, right? Where you're basically again allocating this knowledge base in areas of the brain that we can retrieve later, and then REM allows us to again make those connections and retrieve that information over to look at possibilities, and that's why I think it's very intriguing. Why
is there some left brain, right brain stuff happening here too? I don't know if you've covered.
Yeah, well, there, and we'll get into that. There's some studies on animal studies on dolphins, and they're fascinating, and how different species of orca can travel long distances with sleeping, but still having that cadence to move forward. Birds do this too, that travel and migrate for hours on end, and can still travel sleeping, which is astonishing, and still maintain their level of flight. And
Sorry,
again,
I didn't mean to get us off track here.
But it is fascinating. It is a left-right type of brain, but it's even more complex with dolphins, more so than us, in their capabilities of transitioning left and right, and allowing one side of the brain to rest while the other is active, and then flipping it and allowing the other side to do so, and still being functional. Yes, fascinating stuff on animal studies.
Does non-REM happen? Is like the right or the left side more active during REM versus non-REM? Is there some correlation there? Because I read Ian McGilchrist's Master and His Emissary, and there's a whole lot of people that believe that the left brain and the right brain are this formulaic kind of in the moment versus big picture guide, and there's some not necessarily creative or not creative or masculine or feminine, but really like the master and the worker.
I look at scientists as generalists and also detail researchers, and you can split that thought in both ways. I tend to look more in generalities and how does it come together, but you can peel that onion as fine as you can when it comes to that, and And to make that analogy with Alice in Wonderland, you can really go down that rabbit hole pretty far when it comes to sleep, literally, these discoveries. And then when you look at different animals, and I'm fascinated with again, aquatic animals and their abilities, and dolphins in particular, because they are mammals and they're very similar to us.
That's insane. Okay, you just blow my mind too many times. I didn't mean to get us off track. Okay, so
but let's talk about pathology. Let's talk
about what happens when it goes wrong.
So let's talk about that point about waking up in dreams, because different stages, as I told you, and then at stage 5, sleepwalkers and that night terror difference. So pathologically, if someone has a disruption in that deep sleep, their mind is not conscious. So if you awaken, for example, a sleepwalker, and there's a lot of stories I can tell you, and I'll share this one with you real quick. I had a 12-year-old that came into my ER one time, and she came with her parents, and they were worried about her adapting to her new surroundings. They just moved. They were from Michigan. They moved to Florida. Big house. They were just unpacking stuff. And the first night there, she would start sleepwalking, and she never did this before. So the mom told me that it was a really stormy night in July in Florida, and they were just knocking out. They're so tired, and they were just resting, and it was really stormy, and the kids were in bed, but this little 12-year-old woke up, and she woke up her mom, and it's just like the movies, lightning was flashing, and she says, "Baby, is that you?" And she just saw her in the nightgown, and she was holding a knife to her chest, and just not to her chest, but holding it to her chest, and just walking to her mom with her eyes closed.
Oh God!
And her mom was like saying, "Baby, are you okay?" And she was like half awake, half asleep. It's like, "Is that you?" It's like, and that was the other thing she was asking, because it was a new house for her as well. But turns out she was sleepwalking. She wandered into the kitchen, picked up a knife, and just wandered into the master bedroom and woke up her mom. And then when she woke her up, she kind of knew not to, alarm her, because the reason why sleepwalkers are alarmed when they are awakened is because, again, they're in bed and now they're in a different location. They just don't know how they got there, and they literally don't remember anything because their conscious mind is not awake. Wow. So that's sleepwalking. There's a similar thing called night terrors, where children can wake up screaming, hollering, having all these emotional events. Then you ask them what that happens, and there is no answer, because again, there's no dream event recalled. There's no consciousness there.
No, I used to suffer from that, and it's terrible.
Really?
And I would just suddenly, my wife would be saying, "Honey, are you okay?" And I'm like, "I'm fine. What's going on?" And she's like, "You literally sat up and screamed." And I was like, "I did."
Yeah. And unfortunately, that with children, it's a bit different, because children are really accustomed to behavior that's predictable, and they like the routine. So any disruption of that routine can cause regression. For example, bedwetters that were potty trained, and then all of a sudden they start bedwetting. That could be unfortunate things like a divorce or some event that disrupts their normal routine, or a big move, as it was for this young child. And unfortunately for adults, it could be some traumatic events, mental health related. I see this unfortunately a lot with PTSD. A lot of my vets that have served and have seen horrific things in their past, they suffer quite a bit from that deep sleep, non-REM type of disruption. So my point in all this is that disruption of sleep can occur in any of those areas, and that can affect the issues of how physically the sleep can be manifested as a syndrome or a problem, like night terrors or sleepwalking. But very deeply, it can affect the other aspects in their health as well. And when we talk about physiomental health and talk about these other guideposts of nutrient health, exercise health, holistic health, and mental health, these are the things that impact each other, and why they're so important when we talk of biosynchronicity and how one affects the other. It's not that one is more important. Sleep is definitely very important to establish our circadian rhythm, but it is one connection to all these other aspects that we'll be discussing in the future. So where does that disrupt? If you disrupt sleep health, well, how does that affect your nutrient health? Well, that certainly will affect how effective your body is able to metabolize food, and
Digest
also
food.
and also packaged food. When you consider if you disrupt your sleep cycle, and when you do sleep and how effectively you sleep, also affects your levels of insulin, also affects your ability to digest food in proper times. And if you don't utilize that food, where does it go? Oftentimes in fat storage and other areas that we do not want or intend for it to happen. And that's, again, when sleep is disrupted. How does it affect exercise health? Well,
Well,
your energy. Go ahead.
let's pause on that
Sure.
for a second, because a lot of us
Sure.
have really looked into insulin and how that affects the body. And I know when our insulin is spiked, when we're consuming too many sugars, whether it's carbs or processed sugars or even fruit, when that insulin is spiked, I've read and I've experienced that the body doesn't properly absorb nutrients or digest food, and it converts it to fat. So there is a connection there. When we don't sleep well enough, our body does our insulin spike when we don't sleep well enough? Is there a connection there between sleep and insulin?
I have to say that I'm not quite sure as far as how much of that is influenced with sleep patterns. However, I do, again, more on the general topic of sleep and how it affects our ability to digest food and process food. Yeah. Just think on more of the general terms, that when you're asleep, the body understands that. If you're preparing for sleep, it knows actively that you don't need that increased caloric intake. So all those hormones that you're speaking of, insulin, and then also we'll talk about leptin, ghrelin, and other future discussions regarding nutrient health. But in this discussion around sleep, how that affects and disrupts those hormones and when they're elevated and when they're diminished is based on that cadence of when you're awake and when you're asleep. Because fundamentally speaking, when you're sleeping, you shouldn't need to have that increased caloric expenditure, and your body knows that, and the hormones adjust to that effect. Now, during the wakefulness that we'll discuss in a moment, when cortisol levels start rising and all this, again, this beautiful orchestral ballet that occurs with the hormone, it understands that, and that mobilizes the body during the daytime, because it understands that you do need to remember those basic principles. You need to hunt and forage, and also avoid being hunted as well. So you need that increased caloric surge. You need that clarity and focus. You need to both find food and also avoid being a predator. And that's very much hardwired to any animal in the animal kingdom. But also for us, and how that has adjusted as we've moved into civilizations and modern industry and the new technology, and how that has altered those levels is what has created some of the illnesses that we discuss, including diabetes, with the insulin issues as well. But with nutrient health, again, very fundamental as we're speaking here, as what happens when sleep is disrupted. Is that disruption there, and how some illnesses like diabetes occurs. With exercise health, how it disrupts is our focus and clarity, because again, we're not looking to forage and hunt as much or avoid being hunted, but we need that clarity to be, focused at work, or be able to, pass that physics exam in front of me in school. Or prepare for a test, or prepare for a meeting. We need that focus and clarity. So we're no different from that model of hunter-gatherer, but we just adjusted now in terms of a modern so-called modern level of advancement. So that's where that disruption in the exercise health occurs, when sleep is disrupted. When we think about mental health, lots of studies.
On exercise,
please.
What I think I've noticed with exercise, I think we've all noticed, if we exercise regularly, we sleep better. And if we go too long without a lot of physical activity, it's hard to go to sleep, and our sleep doesn't seem as fulfilling, and we often start sleeping in. And I'm sure there's some connection here with depression and mental health.
Absolutely.
What's the science behind that? Why do we sleep better when we exercise and are active? What is that about?
Exactly. Well, let's certainly dive into all that in just a moment. And again, it comes back to that whole principle of circadian rhythm, and why our last discussion, diving into the biosynchronicity model and these physiomental health guidepost principles, and how they all connect, and how avenues of exercise can help anchor that sleep, and how sleep anchors also your level of focus and clarity the next day. So it's a beautiful way of really kind of tying it all together, but understanding that, yes, we can do more for ourselves with just the basic concept of establishing this rhythm and incorporating all these core principles towards that. So going back to that and a discussion of your initial question about exercise really goes back to these hormones that we discussed and when they elevate and diminish and how effective exercise can help promote that. So let's talk about what initiates this, which for me is the start of a day. So when you wake up in the morning, the dawn breaks. There are a lot of parameters that our body does to awaken us. Part of that is one hormone in particular that will start, but also end our discussion on these hormones, which is melatonin. Around that area of time, and in our previous discussion about circadian rhythm, I had told you that we're basing it on a 24-hour schedule. And generally speaking, understanding that different people have different times when they wake up and sleep and when the sun rises and falls. But let's just say, for example, that 7 o'clock is when the start of the sun rising. So sunrise around that period of time. So around 6:30 or so, our body will start to have areas that help alert us to awaken. One of those is temperature. So our temperature slowly elevates during that period of time. Best sleep is actually achieved when your core temperature drops beneath the normal range that we consider about 38 degrees Celsius or 98.7 Fahrenheit and diminishes, a few degrees, 97, 96, where our sleep is very controlled, but also promoted during that period of time when your core temperature is slightly lower than normal.
This is why they say it's better to sleep in a room that's a little cool, right? Like
it is. As far as good quality sleep, if you can consider quality with that measurement. So it's not so much length of time as it is quality of sleep, and we know that now when it comes to REM and non-REM and why certain illnesses that disrupt REM is problematic, and also medications that we can talk about later as well, why that's an issue and a concern for me as well when we talk about sleep aids. But going back to that pattern, so our core temperature slowly rises during that period of time, which is a reflection of melatonin dropping and cortisol levels, which is also the trigger for cortisol levels to start to rise, which you can start seeing and start advancing from a slow range up to 10 a.m. again on this standard biological clock that I'm referring to. So 7 o'clock and then 10 o'clock, the cortisol levels really start to rise and then peak around noon and 1 o'clock. Cortisol, as we referenced before in our last talk, is considered a stress hormone, but in this instance, it's the activator. It's the mobilization, and it's the important hormone that tells the body that let's go, let's wake up, let's get going.
Focus. Love it.
Yeah. So that's the hormone that is contingent on that melatonin level dropping, and is the trigger for it to start rising. So again, beautiful orchestral ballet that occurs when that happens. So that level starts to rise during that period of time. And during that period of time, around 10 to 1, it peaks. And you mentioned exercise and when it's most beneficial. Cortisol, as it's starting to rise, when I talk to people about exercise, you want to work during that period of time because that's literally like surfing the wave. It's already starting to peak. Get on your surfboard and really ride that wave. Now work out, get that impact when that cortisol surge is starting to go up, and take advantage of it. It's no coincidence when we look at Olympic records, and they had some studies to this. Now, I know I pointed this out to you before, that the most likelihood of Olympic records occurring is during that peak time. And then we could talk about when those people adjust to that, but most Olympic records occur during that 10 to 2 o'clock period of time of peak athletic efficacy and dominance. So it's very interesting to me when that occurs. So that cortisol level, again, tends to peak during that period of time. And then again, it slowly tapers off towards the evening time. And then during that again, same trigger around as those levels start dropping is when the melatonin levels in the evening time start elevating. And then there's a surge that occurs around 10 p.m. Prior to sleep. And again, these are relative hours that we're discussing here. That is a trigger for the pineal gland to secrete melatonin and then promote sleep. Now, the misconception oftentimes is that melatonin is a sleep aid. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of supplements supplements in that regard, that melatonin allows you to sleep. But what it does actually is basically the umpire that brings all the components of sleep, or the body's ability to trigger sleep. To accommodate sleep occurs. Melatonin is that firing official gun to start the race. So he basically lines up everybody at that start line and says, okay, everyone ready to go? Okay, on my mark, ready, set, boom. Melatonin goes off, and then everything is released to allow for sleep to occur. And that's a lot of dominoes that start falling through that period of time. But core temperature starts dropping, your blood pressure drops. There's a lot of homeostasis that occurs during that period of time. Again, hormones are triggered at that point as well, that help promote sleep. And we also talked on the last discussion about the need or the augmentation of certain light frequencies that allow for that to be facilitated even further, or as you said, anchor that sleep pattern. So it allows for a better transition to sleep, and how infrared in the morning activates that cortisol and starts that time clock to anchor that morning time to facilitate when melatonin will start rising and augment our pattern for sleep. So the other hormone that I should mention is also a hormone that creates the urge to sleep. So all these hormones with cortisol and melatonin is that orchestral ballet, but there's another factor too called adenosine. Now, adenosine, I think adenosine, yes.
Adenosine, got it.
You're right. And adenosine, I think about, is a hormone that slowly accumulates over time. And it's almost like if you're familiar with a sand clock, basically. And obviously it's empty when on one side and full on the other. Then you flip it, it slowly starts accumulating. That's adenosine. It slowly kind of accumulates there, and it slowly builds up. And as it builds up, it creates this urge to sleep. And there's been a lot of studies regarding that and that urge. And that's how it was discovered, is when earlier studies basically deprived people of sleep. And we measured, okay, what happens when that occurs? What happens to your focus and clarity, but also what happens to these hormones when different things disrupt that. So adenosine, just to see, let you know what it does. The other analogy to think of is, consider a dam, okay? And there's a river here. And in this dam, there's holes in it, okay? And ordinarily with these holes, water just goes straight through the dam, and it's not, the flow isn't diminished at all. But adenosine basically is what plugs up those holes. So if adenosine slowly comes in, and as it accumulates, it starts plugging up those holes in that dam. And what happens? Of course, the water level rises, and there gets to a point when all these plugs are plugged up with adenosine, and then water rises up until it overwhelms the dam and crests over. Okay. That's the sleep urge that occurs. It slowly builds up, and then to the point where, God, I'm so tired, I need to fall asleep. That's when that adenosine occurs. Now, the reason why that's important is to talk about caffeine. So caffeine basically mimics adenosine and plugs up those holes. Okay, so consider that when among other things, caffeine does a lot of other things. Of course, it's a stimulant and so forth.
Right. But it's also doing the same. That's weird.
As adenosine. So it's plugging up those holes. But the thing is, it doesn't do so indefinitely. It does have a short life, and at some period of time, it will fall off. But as it's plugging up those holes, adenosine's still behind it, building up. Remember, it's still flowing there. It's just not being placed in those holes now. So imagine you have a bunch of adenosine that has nowhere to go. It's not plugging up anything. But then all of a sudden, the caffeine drops off the adenosine receptors, and it then says, whoa, here we go. And then they plug up all those holes, okay? Then that surge of sleep urge occurs, and it crests over. And that's the so-called caffeine crash that occurs.
Crash. Oh,
yep.
Wow.
And that's where the genesis of it, and what the chemistry behind it. It's that basically those receptors for adenosine that were occupied with caffeine suddenly fall off, and now adenosine pops in there, and then causes this urge that drops off. Now, obviously, depending on how much caffeine you drink and how often it can occur, and of course, those binge studiers that drink multiple events, you can imagine that if you keep doing that over time and you plug in these holes and it drops off, that urge just climbs even further, and that crash is going to be tremendous. At the end of the day there, or end of the night if you're a binge studier.
Wow.
So those are the three main hormones that you have to consider when you talk about sleep patterns. And we'd already started touching on that as far as what can happen when those levels are disrupted in any fashion, or what what other chemicals like like caffeine can do to alter that, and that alter that pattern.
Are there adenosine supplements that people can take? Is that a thing?
I haven't seen supplements, and I question as far as if there are, and I have to research that. Unfortunately, I don't know if adenosine is something that's readily available that can be administered for that. It is a readily available hormone. I don't think of any deficiencies in sleep patterns that occur, but I do need to consider that as a possibility. But for the most part, it is something melatonin is, of course, and
Right.
where I actually see the benefit of that supplement isn't so much to promote sleep as to allow us to adjust for sleep.
Right.
There have been some very critical studies that look into that question of, if we remove ourselves from sunlight, is there still an endogenous intrinsic clock that allows us to still establish these hormone effects and allow us to sleep and wake for all the benefits and reasons that our body has derived from evolution? Does it still do that, deprived from that ability to know when it should be awake or asleep? Right. So the first study was back in 1729 by a scientist, Jean-Jacques de Mornay, that was a French scientist who investigated a plant, Mimosa pudica, which is a plant that has leaves that basically open when the sun is out, and basically closes when it's not. It almost looks like it's wilting when it's not. It's just basically deprived of sunlight, so it doesn't want to expand its leaves unless there's a reason for it, I guess, and consideration to make it efficient as a plant. So what his study is basically put a box over that, deprive it from light, and see if it still does the same thing. So very quick in that conclusion, he discovered that there is a very cyclic event that occurs even in the absence of light. Later on, in a study in 1938, two researchers from the University of Chicago, Dr. Kleitman and Richardson, went to a cave in Kentucky, Mammoth Cave, which was totally deprived of any sunlight. So no infrared, nothing can get to that point. Our discussions on circadian rhythm last time talked about infrared as being a trigger. There was none of that in this cave. There was absent of any visible light whatsoever. They stayed there over a month and basically recorded their body temperature. A lot of our information about body temperature regulation and core temperature rising came from their initial studies on this. And what was fascinating, again, is that the body had this ingrained rhythm. Right. So what's curious about all this is, in plants and animals, we've established that even in the absence of light, there is that rhythm that's established. What's even further interesting is that in the studies with Kleitman and Richardson, is that it wasn't perfect. So this clock that we have internally didn't engage the sun as predictable as they would think. And I consider it like a watch. Okay, you can have a watch that's perfectly timed. You set it for 10 o'clock. 1 month from now, you may notice, oh, wow, it's running a little bit fast. It's 10:05. I need to adjust it back to 10 o'clock to get it back in sync to the actual time. Okay, so our clock, our internal clock, has been found to run a little bit faster in the absence of light. After these initial studies where both of them had intrinsic clocks that ran a little bit longer, for the younger gentleman is actually a little bit longer than the older gentleman, which I thought was fascinating. But averagely, on average, the human intrinsic clock runs 24 hours and about 15 minutes long on an average day, which I thought was kind of cool.
No, the only one that I read at the end of the thing, they actually ended up at about a 28-hour day.
Right, and there's studies, but suffice to say, it's longer. It's not precise. No, we're not a Swiss clock, as some people think they are.
Right.
But what's interesting is how, when exposed to light, our body adjusts to it. So you could think that there's a huge thumb and index finger with the sun that just basically winds our clock back. Okay, you're running a bit quick there. Let me just wind you back down to that, to get you back in rhythm. Right. And that to me is beyond cool, because that shows me that, we are connected to the sun in that regard. and that relationship is very much adjustable.
Mhm.
So where I see the additional thought is, as we advance as a society, as a human race, when we go into space where there is no, it's eternal darkness in space, and we talk about sunlight based on our rotation of the sun. That's not going on up there. But still, our genetics craves it, and how are we going to adjust to it? So, NASA and a lot of scientists were understanding that, space, the space lab initially in the 70s and 80s, and of course the space station that we have now, the International Space Station, now has looked at that, and twin studies, which I think are very fascinating as well, looking at all those parameters. But one of them as well is understanding that we still have a circadian rhythm even in space. And we need to accommodate that for our basic well-being, for all the things that we discussed as well. And it is important that even though time is relative in space, we still need to think about 24 hours in that time reference. So again, fascinating stuff, and what can occur and what can happen when it's not. So we did also talk in the past about mitochondrial effects, and why that's important, and how from a cellular level, how it's so critical to establish that rhythm and that cadence in our body, and how that can directly impact our health in real time. In recent time, with recent COVID studies that point to the absence of this cadence of sleep patterns, and how that can impact your ability to fight off inflammation, and how that can impact your ability to fight off illness and your morbidity and mortality with that. And then again, the studies with Zimmerman in 2019 regarding melatonin and the optics of the human body looked at how melatonin in the cellular level is a potent antioxidant to counter for that. And again, that's very critical as well. So let's talk more about re-engagement of that rhythm now.
Well, I think I interrupted you and got us off track again, right when you were about to start to talk about mental health, because we talked about diet and exercise.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think this is a great time to talk about the mental health connection. I know I feel clearer. I have less brain fog. I even feel happier when I'm getting good sleep, and when I'm not. And there's ultimately, it's like a chicken or an egg kind of conversation within myself about depression. Am I depressed because I'm not sleeping well enough, or am I not sleeping well enough because I'm depressed? And I've suffered from a lot of depression in my life, so I can really relate to people that experience that. But I want to understand the science too behind how sleep impacts mental health. And some of the sleep deprivation studies that I read, the crazy one of, I don't remember when, but they kept, they deprived puppies of sleep for so long that they started dying. So I know you can actually die if you don't get enough sleep.
And again, it goes back to that question about, why do we sleep? Why is it necessary? What's the advantage of it as a advanced animal in the planet? Why do I need this amount if its only role is to help me rest? Why physically it would affect me to the point of mortality if deprived of it? And that's again, intriguing as a scientist, but also from a philosophical side as well. And we can discuss that as how it affects mental health and the whole scheme of things. I'll start that discussion by talking about quantity of sleep and quality of sleep. Okay. So when we talk about quantity of sleep, what's good, what's average. When you talk about a newborn and the amount of sleep that they have, obviously a lot, greater of 12 hours and beyond. And then as incrementally as we age, those number drops. We talk about 8 hours, good luck as an adult, getting those good 8 hours of sleep with a family and everything. And understand that the environmental and socioeconomic stressors that affect sleep. But fundamentally, we do have those 8 hours, and then as we age even older, that number drops sadly to 6 hours and sometimes lower. So we can talk about sleep and the quantity as well as the quality of sleep as well. So when sleep is disrupted, we talked about melatonin and its role of activation, and in our last discussion we talked about these cells, which are intrinsic photosensitive ganglionic cells of the retina. receive infrared, activate, if you recall, the pineal gland to release melatonin, but also has that other route to the amygdala, which is deep in our gray cortex, that does help with emotion. And to your point, where that is critical is with studies that looked at subacute affective disorder, or so-called SAD acronym, in Scandinavian studies that looked at the deprivation of sun and how the levels of mental health concerns of depression and anxiety had increased in those areas. So that is very well established that lack of sleep in those areas can directly, not indirectly, and it's not a matter of just, oh, it's sad because I don't see the sun. It's actually on a chemical level that's truly affecting the body ability to have a very calming and less anxious mood from that, which is what's established with the simple effect of these ganglionic cells being activated in the amygdala. So again, the initial pattern of sleep, getting that hardwired and tapping into our body's almost craving to sleep in a certain time frame is necessary to also affect mood and your quality of wellness in your mood, that even keel that's necessary to make you less anxious, but also have that level of activity and elation and just the amount of stress and stress in a good way to make your mind activated and focused and clear, which cortisol does. Now, there's extremes on both ends, right? Too much cortisol, adrenal cortex can cause issues and have issues with high blood pressure and anxiety, but just enough can get that focus and clarity. And again, that's where the balance comes in, where these hormones can be regulated to its peak efficacy, but disruption of the sleep will cause those levels to be higher or lower because of when we wake and sleep and activate these hormones. So that's why, again, the cadence of your sleep patterns will dictate not just your hormone levels, but also your mood and mental health issues as well. So that's also something.
Is there a connection with the neurotransmitters? When we're talking about mood, are we talking about a balance of dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin? Is there a connection here?
Yes, because again, you could think of cortisol as that activator of these other hormones to mobilize the body for caloric reception, but expenditure and productivity. So it is all very much tied in together. And also the timing of when those levels should diminish is also of importance as well in times when they should be low, when you're sleeping. Okay, these hormones shouldn't be activated at times when you should be resting and sleeping. And again, critical for those sleep patterns, as I said, for non-REM and REM, for all those reasons that we discussed earlier. So having said that, when we talk about these different hormones and looking at the quantity of sleep, we should also talk about quality of sleep as well. There are certain medications that disrupt REM. And when you think about REM, and remember that's the critical part that allows us to basically for our mind to make sense of the world. Remember, it's the non-REM sleep, puts the data in where it needs to be, and then REM allows for that. But the other part of REM allows for those connections to occur, but also allows for conflict resolution in a lot of ways. Issues that weren't resolved or questions that it may have. It's almost a way of troubleshooting issues of the day. And again, that's the other masterful thing that REM sleep does. It almost provides a type of calming effect of the body because it does resolve a conflict in the mind in that level.
Wow, right. Like the unanswered riddle is answered, and now we relax. And
because the reason why that can be a concern, and when you talk about folks that say, I slept 8 hours but I don't feel rested, or
I know what it's like to sleep 3 or 4 hours and feel great too. So there's
right. Really, and you probably had in that short period of time just rattled off some good REM, in that period of time.
Exactly.
So you crammed it in that point. But most people don't have that ability, and it's very rare because when there is that cadence that I was talking to you about of going down and drifting off to deeper levels of sleep, and then when REM comes up. So there is, even though REM is a short period of time, just 15 minutes, but to get to that point takes several hours. So there is a necessity to having a specific number of length of time to accommodate for that cycle to occur. And also, coincidentally enough,
this is an important question for me personally, because I have a feeling, as I've spent thousands of hours meditating meditating during my life, and I feel like because of that, I'm able to more quickly enter that level, that state. But I don't. I mean, I could just be like totally arrogant, or thinking that I'm cooler than I am. But it feels like I can get to that. I can get to those deeper levels more quickly because of the meditation work that I've done.
Oh no, I don't think it's arrogant or not, and I would love for you to share to our audience and others, how you're able to accomplish that, because that part of it, and that's why I included as well, one of the guideposts is critical to allowing for best sleep to develop. And again, it's not that one is more important than the other. They're all important because they all impact each other. So having that mindfulness to understand your center and how to get there efficiently and effectively, and be able to do other things that would augment that, which we talked about with sleep, but also nutrient health and exercise, how anchoring all that will precipitate best sleep, and how sleep helps augment your energy level and your efficacy. And again, what we just established with amygdala help affect mood and your mental health. So it is beautifully intertwined.
Yeah, this is the holistic
but interconnected.
right here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just know personally, when I go through chapters where I'm not meditating, my sleep is worse. When I go through chapters when I am meditating, my sleep is better. Same with exercise. When I'm exercising, my sleep is better. When I'm not exercising, my sleep is worse. So I know all this stuff is connected. And I have a feeling too, and maybe it'll be a different podcast, but there's got to be a profound connection with all this stuff with the neurotransmitters. And I think that, like, a lot of my friends that I work with that are struggling in life, and it sounds the same as what you do as well, just helping them break out of that stage and have the at least the motivation, or even just the courage to start exercising, eating right, meditating. Their sleep immediately improves, and when I and I have friends right now that struggle with sleep, and it's hard sometimes to just say really simply, like, because often we try so many different things, medication, supplements, practice, all this stuff, but really, like, you just wake up early and get that sun, and you exercise and you eat right, you're going to start sleeping better. It's really like that simple.
And that's the aha moment for a lot of my patients, is that, gee, doc, I thought all I needed to do was get my mental health straight and then I'd be cured. But it's not just that. It is the exercise health, it is that nutrient health and the sleep health that tied together improves them all. It's all boats rise when the tide rises, and that's the kind of concept I want them to understand, that if you help one, it's not focused on just this one. You have to focus on all of them, and all boats will rise.
Here's a good one. A lot of people are, and I could be wrong here, but a lot of people are totally convinced that they can live healthy, happy, productive lives, sleeping in and staying up late. And I've personally experienced that is impossippable. You can go, it's almost like you can do it for a certain amount of time, but eventually it just starts to spiral. And the problem is when we're in that chapter, because I mean, even I think last year I had a few months of that, and it was most likely tied to, poor health in lots of areas, but we become convinced, no, I'm a night owl, and I can do everything that anyone else can do, but I sleep until 10 or 11. And I just want to, like, shake people and be like, you have to wake up with the sun. You have to get these early morning vibes. You have to exercise in the morning. And it's and they're like, no, I can still be really, really healthy and productive. But I think we're fooling ourselves when we live that cycle of staying up till midnight or 1 or 2, sleeping until 10, not starting our work day until 11 or 12. I think it's a mistake. I really do.
Well, I'll comment on this, okay? Because I have, and this is coming from an ER doctor that's what's called a nocturnist, someone that works at night, starts their day at 7 p.m. and finishes their day at 7 a.m. Okay. Obviously that's disruptive, but when you think about what we just talked about, a circadian rhythm that can be adjusted, it can be done, but then you have to be consistent with that. If you're going to be a nocturnist, well, then that's your life. You're a vampire now. That's your cycle, but that's your rhythm. But there are some studies early on when we talked about that adjustment. Remember, there is that rhythm. Some people do have that clock, their internal clock, that's just a little bit shifted further. And there are they're the so-called night owls, and then there's others that are, have that clock adjusted the other way, where that's you, brother, that wakes up at 5 a.m. That's your clock. That's your rhythm. Other people have a rhythm that's more adjusted to the 7 o'clock. But that's different for any individual. It doesn't mean anything pathological. Doesn't mean anything problematic. It's just you. That's how you're wired. Now, you can adjust for that, and there's a lot of ways you can do so with lighting, right? To be at a trigger of light receptors that will start that adenosine rush as well, and also the cortisol rush that occurs in that morning with that light trigger. So all these are important to establish, but you just have to be mindful of it. I read studies on both behavior with children that were disruptive in class and oftentimes are labeled as ADHD, that can't focus, or those students that are the opposite end, that are too sleepy in the morning, and they're disruptive because they're agitated, because their sleep is disruptive. And I consider the possibility that these are kids that just have their rhythm different than other kids, and we almost punish the night owls and reward.
No, I'm doing it. You're helping me realize I'm still judgmental. I really, I work hard not to be, but just it's based on my own journey, and I've had lots of conversations about this with people too, because we often all go through different cycles and chapters. But you think about all the successful people out there, and people like David Goggins or The Rock, or successful CEOs, or even almost all of them will agree and see the spiritual paths that I've studied too, like Kundalini yoga, and there's a lot of beauty and magic that comes from starting our days early. And basically for me, if I'm sleeping in, I'm depressed. And it's just that simple. So I can't help but look at people through that filter, my friends and family, when they're in chapters of sleeping in, and think like, fuck, they're depressed, and how do I help get through this?
But trust me, it's not ideal. It's not ideal for the night owls, for sure. And I think that they're losing the benefit, as you and I just discussed, of seeing that sunrise,
infrared light, and the increased melatonin production in the cells.
This discussion about that rhythm and adjusting is more for those folks that have environmental factors that alter that. We're talking about the folks that live towards the poles, the northern southern pole regions. But to those point of the night owls, for example, if we counsel those individuals, they can adjust. We can adjust their clock back, and that's where, again, medications like melatonin can slowly help adjust that. There are some studies looking at, for frequent travelers that commute back and forth from Europe to America, and how their clocks are disruptive. Your clock will adjust. It takes a while. So, for example, I'm not sure about the time difference, but it's about 4 or 5 hours from England to New York or so. Someone will correct me on that. But whatever that number is, when you think about how long it would take, it's about an hour adjustment. If we did nothing, took no melatonin, and just took our body's natural ability to take visible cues from the light, it will slowly adjust 1 hour increments at a time, on average, every day, to adjust for that. Okay. But the problem is, once your body adjusts, and it's been a full week, you're in England, and you're doing fine, sleeping and waking, and then you fly back to New York and you screw things up again, and then you have to readjust again. Where that's helpful is melatonin, as far as jumping the clock and just firing that clock a little bit sooner. But again, if we did nothing, our bodies would be able to do that. So with the night owl, if we're going to counsel them and try to adjust them, again, try to get them, if they're wanting to do that. Again, if it's work related or issues like that, then more power to you.
Super sweet. We went through this with some of my friends with the ketamine prescriptions, and my goal is of helping people have these kind of short chapters of transition. And everyone's different, and you're really helping me see that it's every case is different, everyone's different. And I just want to help people experience the kinds of happiness and peace and joy and passion and stuff that I've been able to experience. And I think a lot of it has to do with these basic health concepts.
And consider a child that was told all their lives when they're growing up in elementary school or high school that, get up, you're just being lazy, and how that can create in mental health that. And a lot of those kids, as you may know, from personal experience, they're geniuses. I mean, some of my friends that were, knuckleheads, I'd have to wake up at 10 o'clock. Man, get up, we got to get going. And,
thank you. You're absolutely right.
They were geniuses, or not all of them, but some of them were. But that was my point. Is the stigmatism that we create for that. You could think of all those colloquial, phrases. Early bird gets the worm, and all this stuff. And it's like, well, if you don't up early, you're going to miss out. And you're almost punishing those people that, genetically speaking, they can't they can't
No,
help it.
I'm feeling so guilty. Like, I'm sorry, everyone that I've ever judged for sleeping in or made them feel bad.
Yeah.
Like, it's just a reflection of my looking at myself and my work. But this is why you're the doctor, and I appreciate and love so much how you're so compassionate and willing to see, the good and how people are moving, and we're all so different. And you're right, some of the weirdest of us, or even the seemingly like laziest of us, are some of the most genius and enlightened people. And it's all good, it's all beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just a matter of understanding. And again, the more we learn about sleep and do research, the more we understand that, hey, and this was just recent understanding of our biorhythms and this ingrown clock that we have, and how it can be adjusted, and understanding, where the issues are and how that disruption can alter not just what we've previously thought of as ADHD or lazy kid, aren't. It's not something that we could correct with our chemistry, with an amphetamine,
for people
like
that sleep
Ritalin.
in, could they use one of the SAD lights, an infrared light, first thing in the morning? Say they wake up at 10 a.m. They've already missed it. Can they hang out in front of one of those lights and still get that melatonin activation?
And that's my point with again, ingesting melatonin is one of those things you can ingest. Light is another way to help with that. And when we talk about anchoring your sleep patterns, that's how to do it. So there are some recommendations that we'll discuss, and we can talk into it. One of that I'll touch very briefly right now is that no matter what your cycle is, and if you're saying that you're waking up 5 o'clock before the sun rises, then it is critical to start introducing specific wavelengths of light into your eyes, into your retina, so you can start sensing that and activating all these hormones that we discussed earlier. So yes, there are lights, and they're very fascinating. They basically mimic, and you could adjust it just like an alarm clock, when it starts turning from an infrared type of rays, and then just like a sun, it turns brighter as the clock winds up to the noontime, what you ingest as the noon, and then calms down to the cooler, the warmer red and orange light of dusk, and has that pattern. So it's great. I think a lot of the Scandinavian countries sell out on these type of items, but it's in the home, right? So it's in the center part of the home. So it's almost like there's sun inside their home that allows for this.
That makes me want to like design a chandelier around one of these lights that just stays on all day.
So to your point, when you wake up and you're saying, and I tell people, try to get rid of the snooze button. If you're awake, then get up. There's no point trying to go back to sleep, or your body's already sensing.
That's
I'm
such
awake.
good advice, is every single time, because sometimes I'm like, when I'm really excited, I'll wake up too early. I'll wake up at 2:30 or 3. And those times when I go back to sleep, it almost always kind of screws my day up. Like, I should have just gotten up and stayed up. My body just naturally woke up at that time, so I should have just done it.
Same thing with watches or clocks. If you can avoid it in your room or right next to your nightstand, that's best, because use the light cues. If you see sunlight and you see the break of dawn happening, then that's your time clock. You don't need an alarm clock for that. And again, there'll be times once you set your biorhythms in place and your sleep patterns, you won't need a clock ever. Your body will sense it and just say, hey, time to wake up, and it's going to be that automatic for you, and it's going to be beautiful. So to your point, yes, there are instruments besides melatonin that can be utilized to help adjust your clock and allow for this pattern to develop over time. And even in just those that want to change their clock, that if they are a night owl, you can do it. It's just going to take some time and effort, but be consistent with the pattern. It's not a week at a time. It's like lifetime now, and you can do it to take benefit of everything that we discussed with the light. But there are other ways. If you're still ingrained in that for socioeconomic or work reasons, then it's not necessary. But these tools can be helpful to that end, to get that regulation inside your home.
Before I forget, my favorite tool, because I tried a lot of stuff, is actually pure CBN. That cannabinoid is so powerful and so amazing for sleep, and you don't have the hangover that you can have from some of the stuff like Lunesta or whatever. I can't remember, but
thank you so much for bringing that up, because that was my discussion on REM and non-REM and what medication medications can do to disrupt that. So when we talk about quantity of sleep and quality of sleep, right? So I can give you a medicine right now that will knock you out and make you so-called sleep for 8 hours. It's called sedation. so,
Right.
so, we could talk about the chemistry behind that, but if you think about as a society, what we've used in the past for that, I need to get to some sleep. Alcohol, through the early 20th century, 30s, 40s, it was almost promoted as a way, man, let me just get a shot of something and whiskey to get me to sleep. So that will give you sedation where you will sleep for 8 hours. But what happens with that pattern of sleep that we discussed, it's going to disrupt that pattern. And guess what? You're not going to get REM sleep at all, if almost negligible.
Wow.
So that's one thing that alcohol. Now, you think about other medications, benzos. During the 80s and 90s, Valium was oftentimes prescribed as a sleep aid. I remember the jokes. One movie reference. It's Beetlejuice recently from Halloween. They were talking about the mother that was trying to sleep. It's like, she's riding Prince Valium tonight to get to sleep. And I thought that was a funny reference, but that's like, yeah, during that time, Valium was actually prescribed as a sleep aid for those. And of course, she was drugged up, and she was like, it was a funny moment in the movie, but it was almost sad because that was a medication that was utilized. And again, problems with quantity sleep was established, but the quality and the lack of REM occurred. Okay. Now contrast that with another medication that's utilized for cannabis is cannabis and pharmaceuticals like Lunesta and others, which promote sleep but may disrupt the quality of sleep and not make REM sleep as effective. Now, I don't want any pharmaceutical company coming after me, but it's the issue with the quality of sleep that's the issue, not the quantity. But cannabis, for the most part, helps with drowsiness. We could talk about the strains of indica and sativa, but generally speaking, that type of cannabis or combination of terpenes and cannabinoids that allow and facilitate better sleep does not disrupt REM and oftentimes enhances it. And I have a lot of very artistic that gravitate to certain strains because of that great sleep and the great ideas and concept. Remember, REM is that genius moment that I keep talking about that's so critical for genius to happen. And cannabis can help facilitate that for the very creative and anyone in general, but especially for those type of minds that are very conceptual, that like to look at possibilities, especially when it comes to art and the possibilities of different contrasts of colors. I mean, it's amazing what type of feedback I get from those patients that says, I dreamt of this great idea, and they'll tell me about it in nauseam for hours, and I'm fascinated with that. It's like I need to get that same strain again, and it's like, well, that's part of it, but it's also your quality of sleep and your ability to engage and prepare your mind.
And honestly, their frequency of use, like a lot of Native Americans call cannabis the dream thief, and most of us that are stoners or have been stoners, we know that when we smoke enough, like when we smoke every day, all day, we actually stop remembering our dreams completely. And when we take a break from cannabis, then the next day we just remember. It's like, whoa, our dreams are crazy. But it's really cool to hear that it doesn't disrupt REM sleep. I'm a huge supporter of cannabis and hemp and stuff, as you know. I personally like CBN because there's no psychoactive molecule. It's just the one that helps you sleep. But the drugs and alcohol, because I know if I have one too many drinks, my sleep is shit. And thinking back when I was alcoholic and using different drugs, if we don't get into REM, we're not making those new connections and resolving those conflicts. So of course we're going to basically live in a state of stress or depression because we're not resolving any of the stuff.
Exactly.
It's really mind-blowing.
So you contrast that one individual that takes Valium to go to sleep and then the other individual that takes cannabis. They both sleep 8 hours. You ask them the next morning, how do you feel? And it's classic. The cannabis patient's like, yeah, I feel great. I'm focused. I'm ready to go start my day. Nothing's disruptive, and they get the advantage of the quantity of sleep and the quality of sleep, all the benefits that we discussed with sleep, versus the other gentleman that may have taken a benzo that slept the 8 hours but didn't get that quality. They're in this fog that they often describe, and that lack of focus and clarity. That great, you enjoyed that 8 hours, but you're not rested and rested physically, but mentally there's still conflict. There's no resolution, and there's and the one is not able to take advantage of those hours of sleep because that REM was not able to be initiated. So yes, I mean, so we talked about how physiomental health and all the guideposts are intertwined. We talked about biosynchronicity and engaging this rhythm that our body has established through years of evolution, how our hormones are interactive with that rhythm, and how areas in all that levels can be disruptive and affect our mental health, our nutrient health, our exercise health and clarity, and how holistic health in general combines all these attributes and makes some true meaning and allows for augmentation of all these parameters. So it is important to not just consider sleep health as something that's critical to our general health, but understanding how it interrelates to all these other aspects and how it helps promote and how it can also degrade if we don't address it and make it a priority in our life. So it is a modification of a true life experience. And it isn't a matter of fixing it for 1 week. I'll sleep great for this 1 month and then I'll be okay. No, it's a commitment. And that's what I talk about with my patients. If you truly want to get better, you have to commit to this. And it's nothing drastic. Yeah. And it's not something drastic. Like I said, we're not, training you for a marathon here. We're not trying to get you to try some experimental drug. It is tapping into something your body's already trying to do. And we're just showing you some insight on how to help facilitate that, and not only facilitate it, but augment it. Make the best of what your body's doing. Be the best. The Olympian that you may not be the Olympian that's going to be breaking those records, but be the star in your meeting. Ace that physics exam. Do everything in your power to get your best attributes to its fullest, and that's our goal, and not just the concept of biosynchronicity, but also our core principles in physiomental health. That is our goal. That is the voyage of well-being, and that's our core principle of my clinic and our principles. So we can really start talking about first the historic perspective right now as far as cadence and light exposure. We talked about how the diminishment of light has occurred through the centuries. In the 1800s, we had 50% light exposure, sun exposure as a modern society, and then during the 1950s, that dropped to 25%. By the 1990s, down to 17%, and then now close to 7%. That's almost alarming. It is alarming. And should be to everyone, that this has been the trend. Now we can consider that as an inevitability, or consider how we can still be technologically advanced and still benefit from all this information of AI, of all our genetic research, of all the advancement of technology that were occurring in the next millennium, which is exponential. But we cannot neglect the importance of our own genetics, our own biorhythm. We cannot condense everything in our life to 15-minute increments. We can't allow that. Our body won't allow that for us. And if we do so, it will be a detriment to our own end, truly. Because if we are truly to advance as a species, and I know I'm thinking more holistic in that sense. But if we are truly to advance, we have to consider our own biosynchronicity of our core attributes that are being neglected. And again, if we neglect it further, it's going to be to our own downfall. Truly, I see that. So let's talk about with this specific guidepost. We talked about awakening, and we started talking about it, but let's talk about it now. So when you awaken in the morning, it is a matter of tapping into understanding that the first thing I need to do is get light exposure. Now, you don't have to get a strobe light in your eye, but I talk about, remember those warm lights that I talk about at night? Turn those on. Gradually, what you're trying to do is just awaken your body. One of my favorite orchestral pieces is Bach, and my daughter plays it beautifully, but Sleepers Awaken, where it's just this gradual, beautiful, and Bach does this to me all the time. It's just that mood where it's just slow, where it's just this slow movement that slowly builds up over time. And there's a crescendo that just wakens up, and you're just it's almost I feel like just opening my doors and just like if I could
Yeah.
fly, I would. And that's the feeling I have, and that's the kind of concept I want you to gravitate to. This is what you want to do, is just truly awaken your body. Sleepers awaken is what you want to do. So the way you went to sleep is kind of like the way I act to awaken. So turn on those red lights, slowly acclimate to that, and then slowly kind of engage yourself, to your surroundings. This is a great time, as you mentioned, to meditate. But meditate doesn't have to be to the extremes that a guru like yourself would go through. And
You
it's a
already know I
wonderful.
don't. I can't. I
was going to
can't.
ask you about that.
Yeah, I can't
Yeah.
hold that title. I mean, you
Sorry.
can call it whatever you want, but no, I appreciate it because it's a huge
Yeah.
compliment, and I think you just you're acknowledging how much time I've spent working on these practices. But there really is no separation between the ways that the gurus meditate that we look up to and the way that that we can meditate. And we'll do a whole podcast on
Sure.
meditation because most people misunderstand what they think
Yeah.
it's a process of quieting the mind. And I promise, if that's your goal, you can sit there for 20 years for 10,000 hours and try and quiet your mind and get nowhere. The process of meditation is not about quieting the mind. It's about watching it, and Zen Buddhists and Zen practitioners really nail the simplicity of this, of just sitting and looking and watching the thoughts. And after enough time of watching the thoughts, it's often can be very uncomfortable because you're actually finally present with yourself and you're not distracting yourself from shit. But eventually you go through an experience where you realize that you're the one watching the thoughts. You're not actually the thoughts. And it's one of these early stage kind of awakening experiences. But since we're talking about it, while we were talking, I looked it up, and this is great, especially for people who want to have a more efficient life and actually would maybe like to have more quality sleep and sleep less. Check this out. Meditation has been proven to help people fall asleep twice as quickly, enhance rapid eye movement, sleep states, and preserve deep sleep. In fact, it apparently worked so well that by the end of one insomnia and meditation trial, 60% of participants no longer qualified as insomniacs. Wow.
Wow. There's the science behind it too. It's not just anecdotal evidence. It is truly research based, which is what you and I discuss. We can aspire and talk about these wonderful things, but we have data and research that ties it all together and makes it relevant, that it is impactful. It isn't something that just is good thoughts. But to my point with that, it is a matter of awakening the body and engaging that aspect of yourself. That it starts with me. I am acclimating the surroundings, but part of that idea of starting your day is coming in contact with yourself and your.
And that's my favorite time to meditate, for sure. Right before sunrise.
Yeah.
And
it doesn't have to be long. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean,
no,
for me,
5,
it is
10, 15 minutes. Yep.
Exactly. And that's my point as well. And for me, it's different for everyone, right? But for me, it's reading something mindful, where it be the Dharma or scripture or a philosophical text. I want to engage with something like that, and it doesn't have to be long. A small chapter here, a verse here, and then that starts my day as far as beginning. And what's cool is that oftentimes I'm doing this as the sun's rising or something during that period of time where it really becomes even more impactful. Some people can put music on, but something for yourself is my point. So engage with lighting, and there's studies show that when we're talking about these levels, that first light should occur within 30 minutes. You shouldn't be wandering in the dark, but that first true impactful light should be within that first 30 minutes upon awakening. Okay, so that's the start of your day. Okay, it's doing that. Now from that moment, then it's another point of engaging the other aspects, nutrient health, getting some calories started, because we talk about break fast. You're breaking your fast of the night, but that's a new concept. We don't necessarily had that in our evolutionary aspect, but there should be some caloric intake in there to start your day. having that huge breakfast actually be necessary from that standpoint, but it is necessary to get that day going and getting things started from a nutrient standpoint.
It seems to be
Exercise.
harmful, especially carbs. If you eat too many
Starting,
carbs
yeah,
in the
and that's what
morning,
I'm saying. That heavy breakfast
yeah,
isn't necessary or beneficial in that
right.
regard.
No, I've discovered
Yeah,
protein and fat.
yeah.
And my wife makes the most amazing kefir with the goat milk that she harvests here. And I'm a one meal a day guy. And I used to not just to only do that. But then over time I found that if, around 10 or 11, noon at the latest, if I eat a whole bunch of kefir, I feel great until dinner. That's all that I really need is that protein and fat.
Yeah, and I'm going to enjoy that talk about nutrient health because I really want to dive deep on that. And it's remember we were talking about, we could talk about different diets and that would take an eternity to discuss. Truthfully, when you try to go back to the research and why some are more beneficial than the others. But in general terms, it's about timing of when you eat.
What do you think about the people that say to
consumption?
to eat something like a small amount of protein or fat within half an hour of rising? What do you think about that idea?
I think it's, again, carbs versus proteins versus fat. I mean, that would be more ideal than the carbs for a lot of reasons I will discuss, and how it's packaged. And then again, the timing of it. It's truly about understanding how much you eat and when you eat it. And those two parameters really dictate where it's packaged and how effective it's being utilized and processed. So again, thinking fundamental and general metabolic concerns, and when those hormones are most effective in doing those goals of both metabolism and allocating those energy storage units, where it's a package is critical to all that. So that is something that we'll definitely dive into. But again, generally speaking, that's the morning time is when you want to consider those things, but not to the extreme that we discussed for those reasons. But again, utilizing that normal ability of the body to start mobilizing itself for activity is why you need that nutrient base to start and allow the body to utilize that caloric intake, but the right kind. So that is important. And then exercise right around that period of time, like I told you before, surfing that wave at cortisol levels starting to rise. So take advantage of it. Use that as a way to augment your exercise. How does that benefit? Well, the exercise, of course, natural endorphins, natural level of well-being that's created to the mood that's appreciated, so that improves mental health as well, and then helps your physical health and appearance because of the lean body mass that you'll develop from just those two aspects of when you exercise and how much you eat. And that's just a basic thing without a fad diet, without semaglutide or any other medication out there to augment it. Your body's augmenting it. Take advantage of it just by that simple fact. So those are the aspects of the morning time that you can do to help that. And then again, it's a matter of timing of when you incorporate those things. Now let's talk about the flip side, how you can help benefit your sleep patterns. And again, lighting is very important. We touched this on the last topic of where the lighting is below your line of sight because of where the receptors in the retina are. So key in on lighting. So when you go to sleep at night and prepare yourself, you prepare your whole body for that event. So you start that preparation when the light starts falling. So when the natural light in the sun starts diminishing, you should mimic that in your home. So dim those lights, not the higher ceiling white LED lights, which mimic sunlight. Noontime light is what you want to avoid when you're trying to prepare yourself for sleep. So all that needs to be incorporated in your home. Diminish all the added activators of your mind. So computer systems, phones, TVs, anything that engages your mind and makes you try to be active is, if you want to watch a movie, that's your family event, and I understand that. But what I'm speaking of is if you're trying to prepare your mind for sleep, then that may not be the best tack. So at least an hour prep. If your goal is to sleep at 11, remember these are the times when your hormone levels are starting to activate, melatonin in particular It's trying to line everything up for that starting race for sleep. So don't detract that by putting a movie that ends at 1 o'clock. That's not going to engage your sleep at all. So consider those factors. Get that movie's time started when the sun sets. You can still have that family time, that all the benefits, but be mindful of when that occurs. The timing is important. So prepare your room event as well. So same thing in the room. Engage your room in a very comfortable space that accommodate the cooler temperatures, as we discussed, are very imperative here as well to help facilitate sleep. Remember, your core temperature naturally drops that. So also the converse is correct too. If it's hotter than that, then your core temperature usually are. And we have different levels of core temperature now as well. But if it is elevated than your natural core temperature, then that's not going to help facilitate sleep, or will it allow for a good quality of sleep too? Because remember, that can disrupt your sleep cycle as well. Is disruptions on your environment. So consider lighting, temperature, and then also when you eat. So you don't want to eat beyond 9 p.m. because again, your body's trying to understand, why am I receiving calories here? Should we be awake? Should I be running from an animal? Should I be hunting for something? It's engaging itself to think that it should be awake for some reason. So that's why eating at times beyond 9 p.m. can be detrimental as well. So make sure you don't do that. So lighting. So what I'm speaking to is everything environmental, right? Anything that's coming in.
Please. I had a question for you about this because, sure. And I think it might be as a 1 meal a day guy, and when I'm physically active, sometimes I just might not get the actual amount of calories or protein or carbs that I need. But I feel there's something else here too, because sometimes I'll wake up at midnight or 1 in the morning, and I'll just eat a tablespoon of almond butter or a tablespoon of kefir. It doesn't, I can't do it with like meat or things, but if I just eat a little fat, if I wake up and I eat a little fat, I end up sleeping a lot better until I wake up. But on the flip side, if I eat too much food too late, then I sleep like crap. So
yeah,
I'm curious about why it's obvious to me if I eat too much too late, I'm gonna feel terrible. But why do I actually like I sleep better if I eat some fat in the middle of the night if I wake up? What do you think that's about?
And again, I'm just thinking, generally speaking, your body's a bit confused when it's doing so. Anything that it perceives as nutrient, it will try to process, whether it be carbohydrate, protein, or fat. Now, I would think that the high sugary content, obviously, that's quick fuel. That's something that they could throw in the fire really quick and get that furnace burning. When you talk about marathon runners and carb loading, that's a thought, is that having that reservoir of logs to throw in the fire when they need it. So again, the body's a bit confused if it's receiving that nutrient supply in a time where it should be resting and sleeping and not necessarily processing.
Probably I just didn't eat enough during the day. That's probably
it's a craving. So it may be a nutrient craving, but the concern I have long term for that, on occasion, for whatever reason that your body craves it, I don't necessarily think that would be harmful, but over time it would throw off balances in your insulin and be issues long term. I would foresee that. Okay, cool. But in the short term, and again, what we're talking about is a lifestyle and an approach that you want to acclimate to. But by no means is it hardwired. I mean, things happen.
Well, the truth is, my best sleep is when I eat enough before 7. And I mean, I sometimes I'll eat later, but the truth is, I've learned if I eat enough before 7, and that my
you won't have that craving at midnight, right?
My sleep is the best.
Yeah, and you won't have that craving to eat later on. So it's dual that way. Yeah. So yes. So all we're talking about today was regards to sleep health and why it's important, how it ties into the biosynchronicity model and our physiomental health guidepost guidelines. And now what we're discussing is our recommendations for that. Now we'll have a summary of all this in future podcasts of how all these recommendations can be utilized in your daily routine. And it's a supplement to a prior text or regarding a guide map towards that end. But in a future podcast, we'll have a summary event to bring all this together. But with each of these individual guidepost podcasts, we'll emphasize specific areas. But bear in mind, this is all something that's tied together, and it is a matter of an approach to medicine. This is not a new branch. branch. It's not something beyond just an understanding of how they relate to each other. And it is that commitment as you, as a health seeker, trying to get the best version of themselves, the true well-being path. And it starts with this understanding that it is an investment in yourself. So I strongly recommend that in every individual to really contemplate your life as it is right now. If you truly want to commit to a true voyage to that true well-being, then certainly continue watching us and supporting our podcast here. And please give us all the feedback you can as far as how we can improve and understand how we can benefit you personally. And we'd love to hear from you further on that. But next podcast, we'll discuss more on nutrient health, which falls into this nice discussion about biosynchronicity and how it ties in together. So until then, please stay safe and stay strong and open mind to others and open your relationships and your hearts. And until then, we'll sync up at that point. So thanks again, Justin, for your time. We really love you, brother. And I enjoy this
Thank you for
podcast
yours.
as ever.
Dr. Ancheta, you're the man.
Yeah. Well, certainly I'm the man because you're my patient. You're my brother, and I have some wonderful patients that to drive me to be a better doctor. But I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank